Allegiance by Commissioner Apicella.
We thank you for the opportunity to come and gather together this day. We ask for your hand of blessing on this meeting. We ask that you would guide and direct our meeting so that it is full of wisdom, productivity, and respect for one another. Thank you for helping us accomplish our work and our goals this day. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now for the roll call. Mr. English.
Okay, Mr. Apicella. Here. Mr. McPherson.
Here.
Mr. Bain.
Here.
Ms. Vanucci.
Here.
Myself, Mr. Boswell. Here. Mr. Randall. Madam Chairman, we have a quorum.
With
Mr. Randall absent.
All right. Please let the record note that Mr. Randall is absent. Okay, so now any items of declaration or disqualification?
Madam Chair, I'll be recusing myself from item 7 on the agenda.
Okie dokie. All right, now moving on to public presentations. This is the point in time where anyone from the public can come down and speak for 3 minutes. When you come down, please state your name, address, and the district that you reside. You'll have 3 minutes to talk when the green light comes on. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute left. And when the red light comes on, please cease your comments. Would anyone from the public like to come down? Anybody?
Good evening. My name is Daniel Raja. I am a Stafford County resident. On behalf of All Muslim Association of America, we're interested in making constructive recommendations to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors on possible changes to the cemetery ordinance. We feel that the current ordinance is far stricter than any other local ordinance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, everybody. I'm Skandar Javed. I'm a board member of AMAA. I have spoken here previously, and I'm here to let you know what our purpose is for here. But and we have watched the deliberations of the cemetery committee. We are disappointed that the discussion of the cemetery has been listed on the agenda and then tabled since March. We understand the committee report is scheduled to be discussed tonight, but we have not been provided a copy. This reduces our ability to provide constructive feedback. But like I said previously, that we are ready to work with the board and with the county. Anybody, please give us a chance to show that we are constructive, residents of this, county, not to just, coming for any, to waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane, in the gerrymandered Rock Hill District. Also own property in the gerrymandered Griffiths Whitewater District. Today is a federal holiday. I'm retired. Every day is a federal holiday. Yesterday was Truman Day in the state of Missouri. There's only 45 states in the United States, 4 commonwealths, where common sense is not common, and of course, the Republic of Texas. Today is third shift workers' day. The guys that go to work from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Oh, that's 9 to 5. That's like Dolly Parton. Man, it's really neat to look across here and see, oh, there's only 6 of you today. Hopefully we'll get some 3-3 votes, just like the old days, so we don't make any progress. In 2021, we're going to redistrict. And the biggest thing we need to get rid of is that Garrisonville district, that one with The representative won with 49.99%. That's not 50% plus one. Also, remember the Aquia district was a three-way. So when they voted last week 5-2, didn't really matter. They were outvoted by people who got elected legally. Now, the question is, do all of you legally live in the election district that you represent? I wonder if that's a Commonwealth law. Man, it's great to see your attention. Don't worry, I ain't gonna talk about no cemeteries, because I ain't going to one of those. Now, let me see. I got 55 seconds. I could just, wield it off. The YES program student. Welcome, sir. If you want to be on the wrestling team, I can get you at Oklahoma State University. We beat West Virginia all the time. Ask Jack Cavalier. The real reason I came here was I got my tax bill today. $32,900 for airspace. Not even recorded as 0.00 acres. Amazing. Should be 0.281 acres with a county water and sewer bill. But then again, if I was Mr. Trump, I would fire the director of utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Wadowski. Would anyone else like to come down? Anybody else coming to talk for the public presentations? So just a few people walk in. Okay, seeing nobody coming to the podium, I'm going to go ahead and close the public presentation portion of this evening's meeting. So we'll move on to item number 1 on the agenda, which is the amendment to the Stafford County Comprehensive Plan for cluster subdivision areas. For this, we recognize Mr. Zaraf.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, Mike Zaraf, the Planning and Zoning Department. This item is a comprehensive plan amendment regarding cluster subdivisions.
What's wrong? Is it not up? There we go.
All right. Okay. Okay. So to review the amendments before you, there are a few. First, the amendments would relocate the criteria for cluster subdivisions from the Chapter 2 of the Comprehensive Plan, that's goals, objectives, and policies, to Chapter 3, which is the land use plan, and a new section, Section 3.9, titled Cluster Subdivisions in that chapter. And then in that new section, 3.9, further define and amend the criteria that applies to all cluster subdivisions to all cluster subdivisions inside the urban service area, and then separate criteria for cluster subdivisions outside of the urban service area. Okay, I did this the last meeting. I'm going to do it again just to explain. This is kind of a multi-phase process that we're going through regarding cluster subdivisions. The first phase of the whole effort, on March 20th, 2018, at that time, the board amended the zoning ordinance to adopt a cluster subdivision area map, and that limited the area where cluster subdivisions would be permitted in the county. Then the phase 2, there's several steps in this phase. On March 20th, the board referred, at the same time when they amended the zoning ordinance map, they referred to the Planning Commission limited amendments to the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. On March 28th, the Planning Commission received that referral, and they divided the referral up to initiate a hearing to amend the comp plan and add the cluster subdivision area map to the comprehensive plan. And then the separate effort would be to develop a cluster development committee that was formed to review and consider the modifications to the remainder of the materials that were provided. Then on on April 11th, the committee provided their recommendations to the full commission. The Planning Commission initiated a public hearing for May 9th when they considered those recommendations from the committee. This included the amendments to the comprehensive plan and ordinance amendments that are under consideration this evening. Then a follow-up third phase of the entire effort. On April 17th, the board approved a referral requesting the Planning Commission conduct a comprehensive review of the cluster regulations and develop modifications to the cluster ordinance regulations, and then consider at the same time adjustments to the cluster subdivision area map. This referral was presented to the Planning Commission on April 25th, and the effort is intended to address the full list of concerns that the board has with cluster subdivisions, and this is expected to be a long-term, like 9 to 12-month effort. So just looking through and evaluating these amendments on the issue of relocating the cluster subdivision criteria. This would move the more detailed design criteria to the land use chapter, and also then retain more generalized policies in Chapter 2, and specifically Policy 1.2.12. There would be a new Policy 1.6.6. This would recommend cluster subdivisions only occur in the areas identified on the cluster subdivision area map that is proposed to be added to Chapter 3.9. Then on the issue of amending and defining the cluster subdivision criteria, the amendment establishes criteria for all cluster subdivisions. Criteria in Policy 1.2.12 does apply only to cluster development projects inside the urban service area where there's increased density permitted with a conditional use permit in the R1 zone. Staff notes that there are several criteria that could apply to any cluster subdivision, including those outside of the urban service area. So in Section 3.9, the cluster subdivision criteria defines where where the criteria would apply. There's specific criteria for cluster subdivisions in any location where it's allowed in the county. Some of those criteria include that any open space areas should be contiguous landmass that is not fragmented by the development of subdivision. And then also another criteria would be recommending consistency with the airport land use compatibility standards if a site is located within the overlay district. Those are just two examples of criteria that would apply anywhere. There are some criteria for sites that are inside the urban service area. A sample criteria for that would be subdivisions proposing additional density should be located in areas of the county where public facilities have capacity to absorb the demand of the additional density that they would achieve. And then there's separate criteria for sites that might be outside of the urban service area. One of the criteria that's proposed there is recommending that viable areas of active agricultural and forestry uses be avoided when possible as part of any development plan for cluster subdivisions outside the urban service area. Okay, and staff would recommend approval of the comp plan amendment under R18-119. The amendments provide more certainty as to which criteria apply to a given development based on the location, and we'll take any questions at this time.
Any questions from anyone on the commission? To the left? To the right? No questions? That's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Zaraf. So since this is a county amendment, there's no applicant. So now we'll move on to the public hearing portion. So if anyone from the public is here to speak on this cluster subdivision comprehensive plan update, you have 3 minutes to come down to the podium. Please state your name, address, and the district that you reside. You'll have 3 minutes. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute left, and when the when the red light comes on, your time is expired. Would anyone like to come down? Come on.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, good evening. My name is Bruce Reese, and I'm here as the chairman of the Legislative Committee for the Fredericksburg Area Builders Association. I probably won't need that light. This will be pretty quick. We are absolutely in favor of the cluster ordinance, and a cluster ordinance that works. And our fear is that the actions that are being taken will remove the effectiveness of the cluster ordinance, and it'll literally go away from the county. And we think that would be a loss. It's a planning tool that has benefits, and it doesn't increase density. It allows the lot to be developed. And as far as the forestal district and the agricultural districts go, when a lot gets to us to be developed, the farmer has decided he no longer wants to farm. And so just bear that in mind. There's a reason that it comes to a point where it's going to be developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Would anyone else like to come down?
I won't be as short as him. Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane, gerrymandered, Rock Hill District. I am not in favor of any update. Unlike the builder, cluster subdivisions are much better than conventional subdivisions. They create more open space because God's not making any more land. And you've already politically brought this up as an amendment, so it's after the fact. You know, it's kind of like someone who puts up a shed next to my property and then figures out, oh, the shed's not within 5 feet from the guy's property. I'm going to have to get an after the fact and move it. You are upsetting people's jobs who build these cluster subdivisions. None of you have ever built anything. I can say that factually. I've read all your resumes online. So you have no idea of the amount of income that it takes to build one of these cluster subdivisions. And just to educate you all, many of you have 30-year mortgages and you don't even realize why it was 30 years, because that's how long it takes to depreciate a building. Unlike a school, which should have a 100-year lifespan, but we've seen how people in this county just tear down $4 million assets and replace them. The cluster subdivision is so important to the wildlife, the woodpeckers. My favorite animal is the 2030 cicada. You know, they're going to get a PhD in 2030. That's a public high school diploma. The last one was 2013. You have cardinals, bluebirds. As a 4-H instructor, I can take one board, teach a kid how to build a bluebird house, and guess what? We could put it in the clustered subdivision. But I'm hoping for that vote of 3-3. That would be really nice, you see, because it'll show that you got to have an odd number. And when we do redistrict, don't worry, we'll have 4 election districts and an elected chairman of the Board of Supervisors and the school board and the planning commission. Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Waldowski. Would anyone else like to come down and speak on item number 1 on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing on this item. Bring it back up to the commission for discussion. Do we have any questions for staff?
I have no questions, but can we put 1 and 2 together before we vote on those?
Dan, do we have to take a vote on this before we can present number 2? How's that work?
I recommend proceeding by taking a vote on number 1 before
Okay.
moving on to the next item on the agenda.
Gotcha. Mr. English?
All right. I would make a recommendation that we defer this because I have some language stuff on 2, and I think they go together. So I'm going to make a recommendation we defer number 1 right now.
Okay. So we have a motion by Mr. English, a second by Mr. Boswell. Any discussion, Mr. English?
No.
Mr. Boswell? Any other discussion on the commission? Okay, we go ahead and vote for deferral for the very next meeting for item number 1 on the agenda. Motion passes 6-0 with Mr. Randall being absent. Okay, now moving on to item number 2 on the agenda, the amendment to the zoning ordinance 018-16, and for this we recognize Mr. Zaraf again.
Good evening again. This item is a proposal for a zoning ordinance amendment, again for cluster subdivisions. This is an item that corresponds with the last item to amend the comp plan. Okay, so just going through, I'm going to go through the summary of what's being changed and then an evaluation as I go through to streamline it. The first change is to Section 2825, definitions of specific terms. This would expand the cluster and open space land definitions to reference the new special regulations that are being proposed in the ordinance, and then also existing standards in the to reference existing standards in the subdivision ordinance that apply to these terms. This amendment is mainly a housekeeping item to reference the newly proposed subsections of the ordinance. With Section 2835, that's Table 3.1, the district uses and standards. This would relocate the development standards that relate to cluster subdivisions to a new table specific to cluster subdivisions. With this, there are going to be several, in addition, several other adjustments to the specific standards within the different zoning districts that allow clusters. In the R1 suburban zoning district, there are several adjustments. In the R1 district, there would be an increase to the minimum open space proposed from 30% up to 40%. Also in the R1 district, an increase in the minimum lot area requirement from 8,000 square feet to 8,600 square feet, and then also an increase in the minimum side yard requirement from 8 feet which would also, it says, the current requirement is 8 feet with a total separation between dwellings of 18 feet in total. There would be an increase to a 10-foot side yard setback or a 20-foot total separation of structures onto adjacent lots. This amendment, these amendments to the R1 district will require a greater percentage of a site to be preserved as open space, while also requiring slightly larger lot sizes and building setbacks. Staff evaluated the increase and estimated that the maximum density could still be achieved on a parcel under normal circumstances with the increased open space and lot size requirements. The side yard setback increase would basically be consistent with the side yard requirement for conventional subdivisions under the R1 zoning district. Also, the the next point, in the A1 zoning district, there would be an increase in the minimum side yard requirement from 10 feet up to 20 feet. The increased side yard setback would be consistent with the side yard setback in a conventional subdivision in the A1 zoning district. Also, there would be an additional reference that the cluster subdivision areas map is now located in the comprehensive plan. The map was approved as part of the zoning ordinance, as I'd mentioned in the last presentation. This amendment would refer to the same map, which would now be proposed to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. A separate comp plan amendment is currently in the review process to make that a part of the comp plan. The limits of the cluster subdivision area on the map are not changing from what was already approved. Okay, next changes, Section 2839, special regulations. This would add a new subsection with special provisions that would apply to cluster design subdivisions. The cluster design subdivisions would, some of the, going through the special regulations, point by point, the cluster design subdivisions shall only be permitted on land zoned A1, A2, or R1, and also within the area designated on the cluster subdivision area map in the comp plan. This amendment kind of duplicates the last amendment that I just noted in the previous section on the previous page. The next point, one of the other standards would be it would not permit stormwater management facility areas to satisfy minimum open space area requirements. This provision was a specific request from the Board of Supervisors. The concern is that stormwater management facilities are not consistent with the intended purpose of a cluster subdivision and cluster subdivision open space being utilized for preservation of environmentally sensitive features or rural character or recreation purposes. Looking at the third point, only the surface area of underground stormwater management facilities, if they're included, would be permitted to count towards any required open space. These occurrences may be rare and most likely in more urban development situations. And looking at the fourth point, the next criteria would not permit the first 50 feet of width of any utility or access easements from satisfying the requirements of or the minimum open space requirements. This was also a request from the board. The concern also is that utilities are not consistent with the intended purpose of preserving environmentally sensitive features, rural character, or recreation again as well. And then also there is an exception that only portions of utility easements outside of the first 50 feet of width of utility easement may be allowed to count towards minimum open space. That's if the area is being used for a permitted open space use.
Mr. Zaraf?
Yes.
Really quickly, on bullet number 4.
Yes.
So let me play a hypothetical with you. Let's say you have a parcel of land and the county, as it's coming in with its cluster site plan, determines that that's going to be in an area where they're going to expand water and sewer. And so they want to potentially look at creating an easement on that property, even though it's not there already. Mm-hmm. Is that still not going to be permitted within the 50 feet?
It should not, because that would get determined, I believe, at the record plat stage, and at that point, an easement would be established because the line would, or at least the location of the line should be planned in advance of that project. And I guess it may depend if it's happening as part of that development project and it's gets deeded as part of the subdivision, then yes, that would be an area excluded. That would be excluded. But if it's a utility line that might be happening in the future, but no easement is sought at an earlier stage, then it may not.
So, for example, let's say that they're not seeking the utility right now, but let's say in 5 years the county knows that it's going to be expanding the water and sewer to that area. That would create an eminent domain situation where they have to go in and negotiate to get an easement on that particular parcel. Is there a way that we can look at some language for this to potentially build in an exception that says if the county is looking to adapt that into a utility easement for water or sewer, that the county has the ability to grant the first 50 feet into open space, but only for water and sewer and only if it's at the county's discretion?
So if it's, and it's kind of planned already?
Yes. Yeah, just an
Yeah,
exemption.
yeah.
So I think
Right.
it would actually save the county money. So for example,
Right.
let's say the developer says, I'll give this to you for free. I don't care about the easement, but I want it to count toward my open space. Then the county says, great. Otherwise, they would say, you're not having this because I need it for my open space. You're going to have to come back and buy it later.
Yeah, that is something we should be able to write in.
Okay, perfect.
Next slide. And that's summary of the changes, and staff would recommend approval of the amendments to the zoning ordinance 018-16. The amendments establish standards that will require future cluster subdivisions to be designed in a manner that is more consistent with the purpose of cluster design subdivisions. And if there's a desire to have that language written in, we would probably need deferral to the next meeting to draft some language that would be appropriate if that's will of the commission.
Okay, perfect. Any questions on the commission? Mr. English?
No, that was probably part of my language thing that was gonna, for deferral, okay.
Anyone else? No questions? Okay, you got off easy tonight. So far. Okay, so now we'll move on to the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting on item number 2, the amendment to the zoning ordinance for cluster subdivisions. Does anyone want to come down and speak? You have 3 minutes, same as before. State your name, address, and the district you reside. When the green light comes on, you have 3 minutes. Yellow light, 1 minute. Red light means your time is expired. Any takers? Mr. Wadowski.
Paul Wadowski, 8 Pickett Lane, the gerrymandered Rock Hill District. Well, we already know we're going to defer this. And my main comment is, in conventional subdivisions, there's a 35-foot setback. I'm a stormwater fanatic. We're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I've lived through someone getting a variance illegally. I've been in the court system since 2011, so I kind of know land use pretty well. Whenever you have a staffer who writes something that has an exact number, we have to live by that number until someone who's mathematically inclined reads it for content and figures out, wow, why did we hard code that number? That's why in mathematics we build confidence intervals, so we don't get set into things, so we can take care of hypothetical utility easements with 50 feet. If we would have done that, I might have bought property in Aquia at one time, but the utilities are so bad in there that we don't know what the results of that stuff is 30 years later. So open space is a premium, and that's my big heartburn, is not only the language to readjust, and I guess you're going to favor someone when you put that in wording. And remember, Lady Justice wears a blindfold, so it's fairness. But I know you're all Republicans. So you wear a pirate's patch, so you favor the right. I voted for Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Wadowski. Anyone else like to come down and speak? Okay.
Madam Chairman, members of the commission, Bruce Reese for the Builders Association. We don't get to talk for weeks and then twice in one night. So we absolutely understand that modifications to the cluster ordinance are in order. We get that. But I think you should be very careful, and you've touched on it slightly when you start talking about underground easements and not being able to count those at all toward open space. No one has any idea that there's a gas line under the ground if it's got a soccer field over top of it. They just play on it. And not to have that available as open space, I think would be a stretch too far. And it's not just water and sewer. Power lines are now going underground. Gas lines are underground. But even an above-ground power line has the ability to harness recreational facilities. And it happens in the county. I'm convinced that you've got parks that are under power lines, and it works okay as open space. So don't forget that open space doesn't have to be trees. It doesn't have to be steep slopes. It can simply be open. There's a benefit to having open area. The other issue that I'd like to talk about is the stormwater. I know that all of you have seen attractive, wet stormwater management facilities that are exactly that. They're a haven for wildlife, they're attractive, they're places for trails to walk around. There's an advantage to putting those in an open space area and allowing a community to enjoy that. There are other stormwater management facilities such as bioretention, which are above ground, but apparently they will not be counted. And so we think that should be thought through much more carefully. Again, we understand that there are changes that need to be made. Our fear is that the changes that you're proposing are going to make the cluster so difficult to use that you'll get absolutely no advantage for this great planning tool. And for that, we suggest you consider that more carefully and offer our services to help in any way that we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one coming, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Zaraf?
Madam Chairman, before the Planning Commission gets into question deliberations, I wanted to clarify or correct a statement I made earlier regarding voting on item number 1. I misunderstood the question at the time. The Planning Commission can vote on item number 1 at this time. I thought the question was about voting on those two items together.
Gotcha. All right, well, we already did it, so it doesn't matter, I guess.
The Planning Commission could reconsider its vote if
Okay.
it so
Does anybody want to reconsider number 1's vote?
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion to reconsider item number 1.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Apicella, a second by Mr. Bain. Any discussion, Mr. Apicella?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Bain? Anyone else on the commission care to? Okay, cast your votes for reconsidering. There's your 3-3, Mr. Wadowski.
Boom.
So now what?
It died.
The Planning Commission bylaws state that the motion does not pass.
Okay,
So the deferral remains in effect.
okay. All right, so now we can move on to number 2 safely. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on item number 2?
No, I just make a motion that we defer that because until we get some language cleared up with the exemption of the water and sewer.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. English, and just to clarify, because I don't know if his mic was on, to build out the exemption language for water and sewer when the county is requesting that as an easement. And it was a second by Mr. Boswell. Any discussion, Mr. English?
No.
Mr. Boswell? Anyone else on the commission? No? Okay, go ahead and vote. Okay, motion passes 6-0 with Mr. Randall being absent. So we will take that back up on the May 23rd meeting. So now we move on to item number 3, reclassification for the Stafford Airport Industrial Park. And for this, we recognize Mr. Brian Gouge.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. Brian Gouge with the Planning and Zoning Department. Be providing an update on the Stafford Airport Industrial Park reclassification. This application was deferred to give the applicant an opportunity to address application submittal requirements relating to transportation impact analysis. To summarize, the county ordinance states that traffic impact analysis shall be submitted when the maximum development permitted under the district regulations would generate 1,000 or more vehicle trips per day, and that proffers which limit vehicle trips per day may be taken into consideration when calculating maximum development. And Virginia Code states that the traffic studies for rezoning proposals shall assume the highest vehicle trip generating use allowable under the proposed zoning classification. Revised proffers have been submitted since the completion of the staff report. Those were provided to you as handout number 1 tonight. Revisions limit the number of freestanding restaurants, convenience centers and convenience stores located on the property to 3 each. And revisions provide assurance that certain high traffic generating uses will be limited. However, the ultimate traffic generation on the property may still exceed the TIA traffic generation numbers. And staff has also provided a summary of by right M1 uses, as well as the trip generation numbers from the ITE manual as handout number 4 to sort of summarize, give a comparison based on what was submitted in the TIA versus other by right uses. So in conclusion, staff is supportive of the application with conditions pursuant to O1723, but recommends Planning Commission consider the application submittal requirements as well as impacts to the American Legion Road US Route 1 intersection. And I'll take any questions at this time.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Goosh? Mr. Apicella?
Surprise, I have some questions. So you kind of spoke to this, but I just want to seek clarification regarding something that was said at the last meeting. So as I understand it, again, to clarify, Stafford's requirements for identifying trip generation figures is not more restrictive than the state's requirements?
That's correct.
Okay. And one more time, the state's prescribed standard is what?
Rezoning proposals should assume the highest trip generating use allowable under the proposed district.
Is it fair to say that there are at least 3 places where this standard's mentioned? The Virginia Administrative Code, I think you mentioned it, the Stafford County Code of Ordinances, and on page 20 of Stafford County's rezoning application.
That's correct.
And we have a copy of the applicant's rezoning application. On page 20, it says just what you indicated, that it's the TI is supposed to be based on the maximum use.
Yes.
I think in Virginia and other states, there's an international standard that's supposed to be used in identifying trip generation figures. Can you tell me what that is?
I'm not sure which section you're
Mr.
referring to.
Apicella and Madam Chairman, the staff and VDOT use the Institute of Traffic Engineers manual, and there's an updated edition periodically, which is based on national studies of various commercial uses.
And other states, as far as you know, use that same?
Yes, sir.
So as I recall, in this case, the applicant used light industrial uses as the basis for identifying trips generated, right?
That's correct.
And the multiplier that they used based on light industrial was 6.97 vehicles per day per
Yes,
thousand.
sir.
So for 5,000 square feet, that generates 33 vehicles per day.
That's correct.
That's just a calculation that goes straight into the model. In your research, I think you found that there were over 10 by right uses that generate more traffic than light industrial uses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And for those uses, they generate between 8 to 127 vehicle trips per day.
That appears to be correct, yes.
And restaurant uses, I think you indicated that that's the highest traffic generator at 127 vehicles per day per thousand.
Yes.
So that would generate 63,000 vehicles per day.
At 500,000 square feet, yes.
Right. And I don't think anyone truly believes that it's going to be all restaurants. In fact, they've proffered or provided some new proffers that would limit this project to 3 restaurants, but also, in addition to that, 3 convenience centers and 3 convenience stores. And I think you generated some potential numbers based on what those 9.
I did. Just those 3 types of uses alone, if they were built out to the maximum per the proposed proffers, would generate 5,400 vehicles per day.
Okay, and that's higher than the 33, obviously, just by themselves.
Yep.
Okay, and that doesn't count vehicles per day from other allowable uses that could occur on this site, including the other 9 or 8 that could occur that are above light industrial. So even with these new proffer limitations, we still see that there could be thousands more vehicle trips per day than identified in the applicant's TIA. Is that,
There is the potential for that, yes.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Gouge. Mr. Sherwick, would you like to come up as the applicant and answer any questions? I guess you could present too. You don't have to just answer questions. If there's anything you'd like to add.
I'll probably just, I guess, good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm happy to discuss. Probably best if we jump into questions. You tell me what you'd like to discuss.
Does anybody have any questions? No? No questions?
No, I sit down with him, and I appreciate you coming back with the proper
Sure.
changes that you did make on us, and I think it will help. And I don't foreseeing any of those restaurants going in there because of the problem. We're trying to get restaurants on 610 and 17 as it is. So I appreciate that, and so.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's been some questions about the TIA. What we used were reasonable
Right.
expectations for the property and the market. We did have staff there for the zoning, or for the meeting that outlined the scope of the TIA. We also met with VDOT, and they were agreeable to our TIA. And so, you know, I know that there was a question about 65,000 trips. That's almost Garrisonville Road. And I don't know if you guys have been by Centerport Parkway. The location as well as the market in that area just don't support that. It just doesn't occur. And so the thought with restaurants is something smaller. I know we looked at Route 17 at International Parkway, which this applicant actually owns several of the buildings back there as well. There's the worst deli. It's 1,000, 2,000 square feet. Do I think Outback or Chili's is going to go there? It won't. There's no demographic to support it. I'm hopeful that you guys look at the project as a whole. I know we did look at the TIA to see how we could address it. We also looked at, there's the question of whether or not capping vehicle trips per day. We looked at that. Because of the uncertainty of how the project is going to develop, hopefully, the ownership was unable to proffer that at this time. There was a concern last meeting that, hey, what happens if we have 500,000 square feet of a convenience store, of a restaurant, I wanted to do my best to take that concern away from you, so I capped it, hopefully to address those points. With the fact that we are looking at a project that is basically currently non-compliant with the comp plan. They don't want A1 next to the airport. I'm looking to bring it into compliance with the comp plan. I'm also trying to rezone some property that you want and have identified as areas when you want to see business and growth, but also create jobs. I ran some impact analysis on just what we feel would occur there as warehouse and industrial, and by right, excuse me, on full development, about $80,000 a year. If we do a rezoning, it'd be about $500,000 a year. I'm also taking 22 houses off of the school, or the county's plan for schools. The property is currently enrolled in land use, which would mean a instant payment of back taxes, probably $20,000 or more, 22. One of the concerns that you guys had with Ramblin' Church Road, I'm at no cost, I'm dedicating 55 feet of right-of-way. When you guys need it, take it. I feel that all these pieces that you add up on the pros and cons list do outweigh the con of traffic. And I know there's concerns about, hey, what happens, that area's been industrial for 20 years. I drove by personally this morning to Newport News Airport, to Norfolk Airport, to Richmond Airport. It's industrial around those areas. I don't see these high traffic generating uses that you guys are concerned with locating there. I know that doesn't provide an answer for you, but I hope with the fact of the pros versus cons on this, I've addressed it to the best of my ability. Happy to address any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions on this side? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sherwick.
Sure.
All right. Bring it back to the commission. This is not a public hearing, so we don't have to have a public hearing part. If nobody has any questions, Mr. English, this is in your district.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'm going to make a recommendation that we approve RC 171511715 for reclassification, because just like Mr. Churwick said, We want that industrial down there, and that's what we've all been striving for years. And I think this is a good start with the laundry going in down there, and this, I think this is going to be an excellent fit. So that's why I am supportive of this reclassification.
Madam
Second.
Chairman?
Okay, so I heard a motion by Mr. English, second by Mr. Boswell, and then I heard a Ms. Chairman.
Madam Chairman, please recall, we received new proffers. Under your bylaws, the commission must vote to accept those since they were not in your
Okay,
mail out.
do you want to amend your motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the new proffers first.
Okay, so accept the new proffers, move for approval by Mr. English, second by Mr. Boswell. Mr. English, any comment?
No.
Mr. Boswell? Anyone else on the commission care to comment? Okay, then we get to vote. All right, motion passes 6-0. Congratulations, now you're on to the board.
Then we have to vote on the,
Oh, wait.
vote on the other one.
Oh.
Then we vote on the reclassification.
Oh, got it. I'm sorry. Now we got to vote on the reclassification. Mr. English?
Yeah, no, I've already made the motion to accept it.
All right, so a motion by Mr. English, a second by Mr. Boswell. Any comment?
No.
Mr. Boswell? Anyone else on the commission?
Madam Chairman, I do think rezoning this parcel from residential to M1 would be a good use of this parcel in this area. My concern was and is potential traffic problems on an open-ended project. Even if on the low end, this project will put more cars and trucks on Redmond Church Road and Route 1. The applicants made some additional positive changes, but even with these changes, the traffic generated could still be exponentially larger than 36, 33 vehicle trips per day as presented in their TIA. It could even be as high as 30,000 more vehicle trips on the roads. I find it somewhat ironic the applicant indicates the parcel will never be built out with extremes and yet is not willing to proffer a maximum vehicle trips per day. So without those limits on, further limits on specific uses or maximum vehicle trips per day, I can't support this rezoning. I think it's a mistake. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Apicella. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, so now we get to vote on the reclassification for the Stafford Airport Industrial Park. Please vote. Okay, motion passes 5-1. Now congratulations, I jumped the gun. All right, now moving on to item number 4, amendment to the subdivision ordinance 018-17, and for this we recognize Mr. Gouge. Oh wait, no, I think, who's going to?
Madam Chairman?
Yep.
Just to recap, this was an item that the commission held a public hearing on at your last meeting. It was deferred for the commission to get some questions answered and specifically requested the utilities director, Mr. Jason Towery, to attend. He is here as well as Brent McCord from the State Health Department.
Okay, so for this we recognize Jason Towery. Mr. Gouge was probably like, oh no. All right, go ahead.
Be happy to answer any questions you may have. I will note that the Utilities Commission did vote last night to recommend approval of the sister ordinance 018-18 to remove the language regarding the community drain fields.
So I think some of the questions that we had, and I'm sorry you weren't here at the last meeting, but some of the questions that we had as a commission were these mass drain fields versus individual septic systems. Are they cleaner, greener? Do they create less contamination by like the waterways, the creeks, things like that? And if they do or they don't, is there any scientific evidence one way or the other? Because we heard some information last time. And then the second is around the cost to maintain these systems. Who maintains them? Is it the homeowners association? Does the county have any recourse? Has there been a background of these things failing? So those are some of the things we discussed, and I'm sure other questions will pop up as you start talking.
Sure. Well, I'll go to question number 2 and allow Mr. McCord to talk to question number 1. In terms of question number 2, which is regarding the maintenance and long-term viability, if you will, of the systems, there is significant concern from at least the staff's perspective about the long-term viability. There are a number the health department's indicated anywhere between 5 to 8, if you will, mass systems in the county, 3 of which, by our latest estimates, we would kind of term more of a community system where you would have multiple residences or buildings or trailers, as the case may be, just, going to that system, contributing to that system. Of those 3, at least one of them is in significant failure. The other 2, one I believe is currently in a failed/abandoned state. It's kind of in some disrepair, and the third one is actually under repair right now. So there is some history of failures with these in Stafford County. In terms of the maintenance perspective, Stafford County does not have a local environmental health staff here within on county staff to oversee the maintenance of these mass systems. The mass systems, by definition, are alternative systems, which means that any kind of maintenance or activity related to those systems reports directly to the Department of Health. And I'll again let Mr. McCord answer any questions regarding that. But the Department of Health has indicated that their staff right now does not have the ability to keep up with the maintenance of those systems and to regularly oversee it. We did, over the past couple months, we've reached out to a couple other places, and we talked with Loudoun County was one of the counties that we talked with that actually has local staff. They have dedicated within the county itself. There's 5 individuals that oversee, I believe it's in Loudoun County, they have 1,500 alternative systems, and that again includes a number of these mass drain fields. And I believe they have another 12,000 conventional systems. Again, our Stafford County does not have staff that oversees that. We do, in the Public Works Department, oversee the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance requires a regular pump-out program of the conventional systems. And what that essentially is, from the county's perspective at this point, is we send out notices that require folks to, or every 5 years require folks, to pump out the systems. But in terms of regular enforcement, there has really been little to none that I'm aware of for those who don't report back as to whether or not they have.
Oh, there is, I can tell you. I have one,
Okay.
and I've gotten a letter, and I had to get it pumped.
Okay. Well, and I do know that.
You guys are on that.
There are folks who do pump them, but I'm not aware of, and I talked with the Public Works staff, I'm not aware of any instances where if, for instance, if we don't receive back an acknowledgement of the letter and some kind of evidence of the pump out, I'm not aware of where we've, as a county, ever gone after and fined or penalized those individuals. So that's kind of where we are. I'll let Brent speak to the questions where I can stay here if you all have any other questions about anything I've said.
Does anybody have any questions for him? Because we can always call him back up if we want to wait on Mr. McCord if you think it's a more relevant question. Okay. Mr. McCord, why don't you come on up?
Okay, you wanted the scientific background of the
So,
mass
yes.
drain field a little bit?
So I
or-
think one of my biggest questions is a mass drain field, and I'll give you the backstory. So is a mass drain field more green or less risk of contamination than an individual septic system, or is it vice versa? And the reason I ask this is because we received, I think a couple years ago, an inquiry from a developer to expand the urban services area onto Onville Road so he could hook up to water and sewer. Because he said that he showed an environmental report because he was planning to do a mass drain field, and showed an environmental report that the only place he could put it, because of the rocky soil in Stafford County and the red clay, was within, I think it was 150 feet or something of Aquia Creek. And he, in the environmental report, said that it was not safe to put a mass drain field that close to Aquia Creek, and had asked for a waiver, which we ended up voting, I think unanimously on the Planning Commission and the board, to grant him that waiver because we were very concerned with contamination of the mass drain field. So, we did a lot of research at the time that mass drain fields weren't necessarily greener or cleaner than an individual. And if you think about having 50 homes dump into one drain field and what the water in the ground has to pump out versus an individual septic field, I think it would be much higher of a risk. So I'm just concerning that question. I would love to know what your answer is.
Well, the problem is if you have to have a good soils valuation work up front, and these mass drain fields, they're all going to be what we call alternative systems where they get pre-treatment. So the water sewage that you're putting in the ground is a lot cleaner than septic tank effluent. But if the design's done right, I mean, they're cleaner and greener than conventional systems. You use a lower loading rate, so they will allow for a higher lot yield because you can base your per dwelling gallons per day on, say, 300 gallons a day of dwelling, as opposed to a house that has their own system on their house. You would probably do 600 gallons a day. So you have a smaller safety factor with a mass drain field than you do with individual homes on their own drain field. You have a bigger safety factor due to the gallons per day per bedroom that you design on. But they're pre-treated, it's cleaner effluent that's going into the ground than a conventional type drain field, if that helps.
Okay. Any other questions?
We don't have, the health department, we don't have the ability to monitor these systems like Loudoun County does. We just don't have the staff to do it. That's another oversight concern that you need to be aware of.
And who maintains these?
It would be a maintenance entity, a private company that maintains them. It wouldn't be the HOA. It would be a private, one person that you talk to, or maintenance entity is what they're called, and they're responsible for maintaining the system, submitting reports on it might be a quarterly basis, it might be a monthly basis, it depends on how large a system is. If it's 10,000 gallons a day, they would have a person on staff weekly to monitor the systems and things like that.
And what's the cost to maintain it, and who pays for it?
The homeowners association, the people that use it would pay for it with a monthly, sewage fee or something like that. They would maintain it. It would be like a sewage bill if you're on a public sewer system, basically. And they would pay this maintenance entity to maintain the system.
I got a question. Mr. Bain, do you have one? Oh, go ahead, I'll let you
Go ahead.
first.
Oh, okay, yeah, Mr. McPherson?
I did have one question, and I'm not sure which of you would want to answer it. So everything fails at some point if it's not properly maintained. If
Right.
one of these mass alternative drain fields is to fail, what is the onus on Stafford County at that point? I think that's one of the concerns is if it's not being properly maintained and we're not enforcing, what actions and costs does the county have to bear in that case? I'd like to hear that.
I don't think the county, it's going to be the maintenance entity, the homeowners association is going to have to get it fixed.
If you don't know the answer, I think he might know the
Okay,
answer.
go ahead.
That's the million-dollar question, literally. And I think it depends on a couple of factors, obviously. So there was one, for instance, that the health department indicated they visited earlier today that has sewage spilling out onto the ground. Fortunately, in that case, they are very close to public sewer and within the urban service area. So the thought is that it would be a relatively reasonable cost for in this case, a trailer park to be able to hook up. But again, it could be between design and construction and fees, a couple $100,000 to get that done. And then there's the question of whether or not that owner actually has the ability to do that. And if they don't, which often is the case, that's a sizable chunk of change, then usually it would come, at some point, they would come to the Department of Utilities somehow and request some sort of extension using public funds, because it's at that point a health issue, an environmental and a public health issue. And I'm not aware, I'm not personally aware of a situation where, in this case, it's 31 trailer homes, where the board has taken action to say that, well, all of those homes are now, you can no longer live in them, that they're now condemned, or that the property itself is now condemned. So, and then, but if you were to go, let's say, outside of the urban service area, or even within the urban service area, but a mile or 2 or 3 away from sewer, right now, costs to extend force mains we're roughly about $1 million a mile. And then you have the cost of the sewage pump station, which can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on the size of the station. And then, of course, there's long-term maintenance costs. And obviously, to the risk that you might be extending the urban service area by virtue of, a mile extension or 2 or 3 miles extension.
Right, I do understand about extending the urban services area. That can be very expensive. But let's say that that's really not an option. It's 8 miles from the nearest connection. Who would have to pay for that? And I think my point is looking forward, depending on the way this goes, we would have to make clear that any mass drain field made would have to have a plan for maintenance. And if that maintenance is not kept up, then the county's not going to step in and pay that for them when it fails.
There's nobody to oversee it, that's the problem.
Well, right, then that's something we have to look at.
Yeah.
So, but say it's 8 miles out from the urban services area.
Right.
Does the county have to do anything? I mean, you don't want to condemn 31 people out of their houses, so that'd be kind of tough.
Does the county have to? I think that would probably be a question the board would have to answer at that time. I think the county, based on how we have currently handled things, we would look to do something. And for instance, Loudoun County actually has Loudoun County Service Authority, and that's a service authority. It's a little different than what we have here, but they do maintain a couple of mass drain fields of systems where we're so far away from public sewer. And in those cases, they operate with the Department of Health to do all the permitting and regulating of those systems, and then all the maintenance and so forth. And then they are charged a service fee like any other county sewer customer would be. We don't have any of those systems right now, so certainly if it was that kind of distance away, that would be another option to look at if the soils were there that could support it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Bain?
Yes, Mr. McCord. The maintenance entities that you were referring to, are they certified sewage treatment plant operators or have any sort of certification?
Yes, they're licensed through the Department of Occupation and Regulation.
And are they bonded or insured in such a way?
They do
that
have a bond that goes with it to, support the program.
Is it sufficient to cover replacement cost?
I don't know if it's sufficient to do that or not, but all systems, they do have a certain amount of reserve area available, required to replace the system if they have to.
I'm just wondering what would keep one of those entities from coming in, charging exorbitant rates for 3 years, have the system fail, and then they disappear. I can envision that happening, leaving the homeowners holding the bag. And unless there was some sort of insurance or bond that would cover full replacement of the system, then it falls on the county. The homeowners are going to be in front of the supervisors screaming and did not know what they were getting into when they bought their homes.
Right. It has a lot to do with the size of the system if it gets over 50 lots, but I don't have an accurate answer for you to that, but I can get it for you and provide it for you.
I'm more interested in finding out how we provide for that,
Right.
for the county to impose that kind of a requirement.
Dan, that
yeah.
might be a question for you. I don't think we can do that, huh?
That's a new question. I'd have to do some research.
Mr. Apicella?
You didn't have
It's
anything to
not
do
the
tonight.
same thing, but I think it's Caroline County that has their own, or a separate water utility run by a private company, and that they've charged exorbitant fees. I've seen it in the paper. Maybe I'm not mentioning the right county, but have you heard any, or are you aware of any situations where, that are relevant to this kind of a setup where private companies managed a mass drain field and fees charged to customers has been an issue?
No, because we don't have the 8
I'm not
mass.
saying here in Stafford, I'm saying just generally speaking.
No, because these mass drain fields are kind of like a new thing the last 4 or 5 years that have, started happening, and we really haven't had that many go in. The ones we have are old ones, and there is no maintenance set up for those, and we're dealing with those situations like the mobile home park that we discovered today that's blowing up out of the ground, so,
Jason,
that's
are
a
you
vast
aware of
range.
any pricing issues, cost issues imposed on residents?
I'm not aware. I do know about Caroline County, for example, and it would be a similar kind of setup, but off the top of my head, I don't know of any locally. Well, I do know, for instance, I think the
Again, I'm not saying locally, because this could be anywhere in the
Sure.
state. This
Well,
is a setup
and it's-
maintained by a private entity who's charging customers rates to maintain a system. They're basically controlling those rates, and can charge, I guess, up to whatever the State Corporation Commission would allow.
That's right. And they are out there. I know they're out there. I'm not familiar, as Brent said, these are relatively new, particularly on the community drain field side.
But the county would have no ability to step in if there was sticker shock for residents who were under this kind of a setup.
I don't know the answer to that question immediately. I'd have to take a closer look at that to see what ability the county would have in a situation like that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on the commission? No? All right, thank you so much. Okay, so I'll bring it back to the commission. Does anybody have questions for staff, for Mr. Harvey? No? All right, so what's the will of the commission on item number 4 on the agenda?
I'm going to make a motion that we approve the ordinance that we accept no community drain fields. I don't know what there's no classified number, so I'll just make a motion to accept it.
Okay. Do we have a
Proposed ordinance 018-17, there you go.
So we have a motion to accept ordinance 018-17. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. English, a second by Mr. Bain. Mr. English, would you care to comment?
No, I don't.
Mr. Bain?
No, thank you.
Any other one want to comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may, I think we're still lacking enough information. This has come up fairly recently, so I do not support this motion. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I think we lack the information to make a fully informed decision at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McPherson. Any other comments?
Mr. That's
Boswell?
exactly what I was going to say. I agree with him. I believe we're voting on this without all the information.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. So now we can vote. Okay, motion passes 4-2 with Mr. Randall being absent. Thank you very much for coming, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Item number 5 on the agenda, the 512 convenience store, is going to be on the May 23rd agenda, and the conditional use permit for Patriots Crossing Car Wash is also going to be on the May 23rd agenda. So now moving on to new business, we have the Quantico Village preliminary subdivision plan, and for this we recognize staff because there's no name on the agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Please recognize Eva Campbell for the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Eva Campbell, and I'm presenting item number 7, a preliminary plan, subdivision plan for Quantico Village. The site is located on parcels 1337 and 1342A off the south side of Telegraph Road and east of Route 1. The parcels are approximately 12.58 acres, currently zoned R3 urban residential, and there's about 7.9 acres of open space proposed. It's located in the Griffiths-Widewater election district, and it's proposing 80 townhouse units. This is a location map of where it's located, and you'll notice that the site is within the red hashing here. The property is currently vacant and is surrounded by a mix of residential and commercially zoned land. The area to the north is currently in use by Clearview Mobile Home Park, which is right here. And to the south of the property is Potomac Hills Townhouse Development here. On March 17, 2017, both parcels were rezoned from B1 convenience commercial and B2 urban commercial to R3 urban residential. Both parcels have proffers and are being developed under the regulations in effect at the time of the rezoning. The layout of the design has shifted slightly from the approved generalized development plan, which approved up to 86 lots, but net density calculations required by the subdivision ordinance only allow for 80. The primary access for the site will be off of Telegraph Road, and the proposed streets in the development, Barnwell Drive, Lentz Lane, Huff Drive, and Cates Lane are private ingress-egress easements and will be maintained by the Homeowners Association. The plan proposes a proffered right turn lane off of Telegraph Road, and because of the location of the parcel in relation to Quantico Military Base, noise abatement and soundproofing requirements will have to be looked at building permits as stated in the proffers. The applicant is also proposing a tot lot located on the north side of the property, and the proffers state that all the townhomes are to be constructed in accordance with the visuals depicted in Exhibit A within Attachment 5, which is seen right here. And all proffers are located in detail in the staff report as Attachment 5. There are approximately 1.14 acres of wetlands and floodplains within the critical resource protection area, which is located right here on the narrow part of the property. All lots are to be served by public water and sewer, and stormwater management will consist of 4 below-grade gravel infiltration facilities with extended detention. The extended detention facility will utilize a reservoir to provide detention of the 1 in 10-year 24-hour storms, and an outlet control structure will be utilized to regulate the peak discharge from the facility. Staff recommends approval of Quantico Village preliminary subdivision plan, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Have any questions from
Can
Mr.
you
Apicella?
show on the site plan, where's the tot lot going?
Oh, yeah, I meant to circle that. It's right, sorry, it's a little one here. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Ms. Campbell, okay, if there's only one entrance into this, that's the only,
Yes.
just one entrance?
Yes, one entrance off of Telegraph Road.
Where does that, on Telegraph Road, where does that come out at? Do you know exactly where on Telegraph Road that comes out at? Is it past Widewater Road, before we get to Widewater Road, or?
I'm not positive.
Commissioner English and Madam Chairman, the property is located between Widewater Road and Route 1 on the west side of the road. So it's in
Right.
an area that right now that has no development in the nearby vicinity. There's a few houses further south.
So does it, the road, I mean, where's Widewater Road connected to, in front of the, where this entrance is coming out at?
It would be further to the south.
Further south?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Should have that one.
Any other
Okay.
questions? Any other questions from the commission? All right, looks like you got off easy too. Okay, so we can't kick this over to Mr. Boswell. So does the commission have any suggestions as to how we move forward? Mr. English, nobody? All right, so nobody wants to make a motion, so we'll just defer it? Kick it down the road?
Madam Chairman.
Yep.
I move to recommend approval of 17-1-52086 Quantico Village preliminary subdivision plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Apicella. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion by Mr. Apicella, second by Mr. McPherson. Any comment, Mr. Apicella?
No, ma'am.
Mr. McPherson?
No.
All right, any other members have any comment? Okay, then, here we go. Go ahead and vote. Okay, motion passes 4-1. All right, don't think they're all going to be this easy. Thank you, you did a great job, Ms. Campbell. Okay, now moving on to the planning director's report. Mr. Harvey.
Madam Chairman, I have no report tonight.
Okay, Mr. Wisniewski.
Madam Chairman, I have no report, thank you.
All right, keeping up with Ms. McClendon's style, I like it. Okay, now moving on to committee reports. Landscaping Subcommittee report. Mr. English, I think you're the landscaping guru.
I don't have an update. Did you, Kathy, did you bring an update from?
Well, Madam Chairman,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Mr. English.
Mr. Harvey.
If I recall correctly, the last meeting we asked if commissioners had comments to please send them to staff. We anticipate providing a final version of the document at your next meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So again, if any commissioners have comments, you please email them to either myself or Andrea. We greatly
Okay.
appreciate it.
Got that, everybody? If you have comments on landscaping, please email it to Andrea so we can get this subcommittee closed out at the next Planning Commission meeting. Okay, now moving on to A1 Subcommittee. Mr. English,
Yeah,
that's you
fine.
again.
Yeah, our next meeting's the 16th. Stephen, that was okay with you, right? Mr. Bain responded. Okay, so, yeah, the next meeting's the 16th at 6:30 ABC Conference.
Perfect. All right. All right, now moving on to the Cemetery Ordinance Subcommittee. I think we're going to recognize Ms. Kathy Baker for this presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. Kathy Baker, Department of Planning and Zoning. I don't have a presentation. I'm going to recap what you all have done with the Cemetery Committee Ordinance. In December 2016, the Board adopted Ordinance 1639, which provided standards and processes for establishment of cemeteries in accordance with the state code. Among other items, the ordinance required consent of property owners within 250 yards of a cemetery unless separated by a public road. Also, a tract of land must be between 25 and 300 acres. It also specified no burials may be located within 900 feet of property owned by the county that has a well used as a public water supply. It also specified no burials may be located within 900 feet of a terminal reservoir or a perennial stream that drains to a terminal reservoir, or within 900 feet of any private well used as a drinking water supply. It also required a site plan approved for any new cemeteries. So in September 2017, the Board of Supervisors discussed this ordinance based on some input from citizens. They were looking at setbacks from existing wells and water resources. So the board did request that the Planning Commission consider whether any amendments were necessary to that ordinance. So in November 2017, the Planning Commission discussed this item and established a cemetery committee to study this with Commissioners Vanucci, English, and Cohen. There were 2 committee meetings held. A notification was sent to citizens who had previously expressed interest in this issue. So at the first meeting on December 6th of 2017, the committee reviewed state code provisions as well as the timeline and public process of the ordinance that was adopted in 2016. They also compared cemetery provisions in other localities, reviewed a map showing potential cemetery properties in the county, and looked at related cemetery studies that had been done in the past. The committee received public comment at the meeting. The committee also held a second meeting in February 2018. At this time, Commissioner Cohen was no longer a member of the Planning Commission, so he no longer was on this committee. So it was just Ms. Vanucci and Mr. English. The committee reviewed information that had been presented by the public, including the use of vaults in cemeteries, whether the county could require certain burial methods, including the use of vaults. The committee also reviewed whether other localities prohibit cemeteries and discussed the draft groundwater management study for Piedmont area that had been done by a consultant for the county. The public comment was also received at this meeting, and there were some documents presented by Ms. Deborah Ray Carnes as well as Mr. Glenn Patterson. The committee recommends leaving the existing ordinance in place and forwarding this recommendation to the board. The Planning Commission as a whole would need to vote if they wish to do what the committee recommended. The committee did acknowledge the primary reasons for their recommendation included the distances required in the existing ordinance between drinking water wells and burial sites are supported by scientific evidence. There is no new information that had been presented to refute the studies on the burial distances specified in the existing ordinance. While cemetery owners may follow certain practices that would help protect drinking water resources, such as the use of vaults, the county can't require these practices. And then finally, the existing ordinance permits the establishment of new cemeteries while taking into consideration the protection of the county's drinking water resources. So that's basically the summary. I did email the report with all the attachments out to you all earlier today. You all had seen all of those attachments in prior form. The biggest piece of the attachment was several of those studies that were referenced. So I'll be happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Madam Chairman, I'd recommend we just hold off to the next meetings, because we just, like I said, we just got this evening, to give us, the other committee members, time to read through this. So just ask that we hold off. I don't think you need I don't need a motion on that, do I, Mr. Lawyer?
Mr. Lawyer.
He's changed his name.
There's no motion required.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, cluster work session. Okay, that's the next one. So we don't have the cluster subcommittee anymore. We've decided that with phase 3, we're going to move forward with a cluster work session. And so I'm hoping that we can do that maybe over the summer in either July or August with the full commission. And so one of the things that I think would be really helpful is if we brainstormed, and the first meeting in June, if we put on the committee report section, to have maybe 10 or 15 minutes where we sort of talk about how we want to structure that meeting, how we want, what outcomes out of the meeting do we want. For example, if we want to look at the map, staff is going to need time to run some of the GIS models on the map. And if you have any suggestions on taking areas out or adding areas in your district, for example, if you could come and kind of explain, like, that's one of the things that you would like to see us kind of get to in that work group, because I think that'll help sort of guide the meeting, and we'll have a public meeting to allow public input for one evening, probably around 2 hours. And so if you could also come up with some dates for July and August, that would be really helpful, so we can get that scheduled over the summer. And then the goal out of that broad work group is to determine, what do we need to do? Do we need to establish a subcommittee at that point? And then what would the subcommittee's action items be to accomplish bringing something back to us by the end of the year potentially? So put your thinking caps on and come to the June meeting, and we'll talk about how we're going to structure that work session. No chairman's report. Other business TRC for May 23rd has been canceled. Now we need to move to approve 4 sets of minutes, December 23rd, January 17th, February 14th, and March 14th. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion. Do we have to do each individual one, Mr. Lawyer?
Mr. Wisniewski.
They can be approved all at one time.
All right, so do we have a motion?
I make a motion, we approve December 23rd, 2017, January 17th, 2018, February 14th, 2018, March 14th, 2018. I make a motion to approve all
Okay,
four.
motion by Mr. English. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so motion by Mr. English, second by Mr. Bain. Any comment from anyone? Okay, perfect. Go ahead and vote. All right, motion passes 6-0. Meeting adjourned.
Easy, killer.
I almost spilled the candy.